1. Shadows among the dunes. The Mojave Desert sun was slowly setting, casting an orange glow over the sand dunes that stretched like frozen waves. Seth, a solo adventurer and photographer, limped along with a heavy pack on his back and sweat dripping down his face. His GPS had been dead for 2 hours. He had lost his bearings, and with only a small bottle of water, he knew he had to find shelter before nightfall. As the last rays of the sun disappeared, his eyes caught the silhouette of a small building in the distance. An old log cabin, rickety, time-worn, half-swallowed by sand. Beside it, an old stone well, its mouth blocked by rotting planks that were about to collapse. With a heavy sigh, Seth approached and pushed open the creaking door of the cabin. The interior was sparse and nearly empty. Just an old wooden bed with a thin, dusty mattress, a small table with crooked legs, and floorboards that squeaked when stepped on. He was grateful to have found shelter, though the atmosphere felt strange, unusually quiet, like something was waiting. The first night, Seth slept in his thick jacket, enveloped in the cold desert air. He was almost asleep when he heard footsteps, soft, crunching in the sand, coming from outside. He sat up quickly, waited. No animal sounds, no wind, just footsteps and silence. He opened the door and shone the flashlight into the well. Empty. As usual. He chuckled, blaming it on exhaustion and paranoia. But the second night, the sound came back. Footsteps. Slower. Closer. This time, they stopped just outside the cabin door. Seth held his breath. Then there was a scratch, like something scraping the doorframe with a fingernail or a bone. He jumped up and opened the door. Again. No one there. But in the sand, there was a faint footprint. Like a human footprint, except the toes were long, bent in odd directions. By morning, the desert wind had swept the footprint away. He convinced himself it was just a lucid dream. He was beginning to think the cabin had some strange effect on him. But he stayed, too tired to go any further. The third night, he couldn't sleep. The footsteps were back. This time, it wasn't just outside. He swore he heard the floorboards creaking inside, but he didn't dare open his eyes. He froze in the dark, listening to something slowly walk toward his bed, then stop at the end. There was no sound of breathing, just a dead silence pressing against his chest. When he woke up, the sky was clear, but the air felt heavy, and at the foot of the bed, sand was scattered. He had closed the door tightly the night before. He began to panic. He had to get out of there. But when he left the hut, his steps were heavy, like the ground was sucking him in. He looked toward the well, and for some reason he felt watched. There was no one, but the well, dark as it was, seemed to hold something beneath it, something that was waking up. He started walking quickly, away from the hut, looking for a signal or anyone, but he felt like he was being followed. Every time he stopped, the footsteps stopped. Every time he turned, the desert was silent. But the hairs on the back of his neck didn't stop standing. The fourth night, he returned. He couldn't go far. His legs ached. His breath was short. He felt lighter, emptier. He didn't turn on the light. He just sat there, waiting. The footsteps came faster. No more hiding. The door swung open slowly, even though he had locked it. And that night, Seth disappeared. A few weeks later, a search party found the cabin. Inside, there was only an old bed and an empty bag. No body. But outside the cabin, right in front of the well, was a single footprint, long, crooked, and leading away from the well, not in. Local notes. The locals rarely talk about the place. They call it the well keeper's hut. Legend has it that the old well is guarded by an ancient being who imitates human footsteps to get close. If you sleep there for more than 3 nights, the well keeper will assume you are part of his land. He will take your place and you will fall in. Some hikers swear they have seen a thin man walking alone through the sand at dusk. He walks aimlessly. His face is turned toward the well. His body looks like Seth, but his eyes, they are empty, as if no longer human. 2. The Faceless Driver. The night sky over Death Valley was an endless sheet of black, dotted with pale, barely moving stars. The straight stretch of asphalt looked like a rope stretched to the horizon. The desert air had cooled from the heat of the day to a bitter cold, and the wind only blew lazily occasionally, carrying the scent of dust and something indescribable. Reggie, a seasoned truck driver, had been driving for nearly 9 hours straight. He was driving alone on a westbound delivery route, a nighttime route he usually took to avoid traffic. The radio was a hum of static, and all his favorite songs had been played. It was 2:47 a.m. when he saw her. Someone was standing on the side of the road. A woman. She was wearing a long white dress that shimmered faintly in the truck's headlights. Her hair was long, black, and flowing in the wind. She stood still, not waving, just staring at the road. Reggie slowed down, then stopped on the shoulder of the road. "Hey, you okay?" he said, rolling down the window. The woman didn't answer, just turned slowly and pointed west, the direction Reggie was headed. He hesitated, but anyone standing alone in Death Valley in the middle of the night would need help. So, reluctantly, he opened the passenger door. She climbed in without a word. Her steps were slow, her dress brushing the floor of the truck. She sat up straight, looking straight ahead. Reggie tried to lighten the mood. "It's cold tonight. Where have you been? Is your car broken down?" No response, just silence. Reggie tried to see her face in the rearview mirror, but strangely, it was blurry. Blurry, like it was covered in steam or fog. He wiped the mirror with his hand, but it didn't help. The longer he did it, the more uncomfortable he felt. He tried again. "What's your name?" The woman finally moved. She pointed slowly down the road ahead, then went still again. She said nothing. About 10 minutes later, Reggie dared to look directly at her. The passenger seat was empty. He slammed on the brakes. The truck slowed to a stop in the middle of the deserted road. Reggie's heart raced. He opened the door, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the area. There was no one there. No footprints, no open doors, no sounds. Only the wind that had begun to blow softly. He slid back into the driver's seat, trying to catch his breath. "Maybe I'm tired. Too tired," he told himself. But a chill suddenly settled in the cabin, like something had entered or had never really left. A few miles later, he saw a sign on the side of the road. The paint was worn, but the words were still legible. "Accident area, 1963. All passengers burned to death." Reggie felt goosebumps. He had heard old stories from old drivers about tour buses that had burned to the ground after hitting a cliff in the area. There had been no survivors. The woman, they said, had been burned alive and was never found. Reggie never drove the Death Valley route at night again after that night. But the trauma didn't stop on the road. A few weeks later, while driving at night on a different route, he smelled the strange scent again, like burning hair. He turned off the air conditioner, opened the windows. The smell was still there. Then he heard a voice, a woman's voice, soft, whispering softly behind his ear. "Thank you for picking me up." Reggie turned his head in panic. The passenger seat was empty, but there were marks of her sitting, a clear indentation in the leather seat, and a trail of ash on the floor of the cabin. From then on, whenever Reggie drove alone along the desolate desert road, he would feel her presence, sometimes in the rearview mirror, sometimes through the smell of burning, and sometimes from a faint voice calling his name in a mournful tone. 3. The Forsaken Fortress. The Nevada desert stretches wide and silent, like a page of history that time has left behind. In the middle of the barren desert stands an ancient ruin, a small stone fort, a relic of the Civil War. The place has never been clearly marked on any official historical maps, but it is always spoken of in local whispers as Fort Lachlan, a fort that was never conquered but also never truly abandoned. Alicia Monroe, a young archaeologist from a university in New Mexico, has come to study the site as part of her dissertation. She is ambitious, intelligent, and skeptical of folklore. She rents an old Jeep and a field tent, and drives through the desert with a map and a notebook in hand. When she reaches the nearest small village, Alicia buys water and gas, then asks the shopkeeper for directions to the ruins. Fort Lachlan? The old man behind the counter raises an eyebrow. You shouldn't stay there. Those stone walls hold more than dust. Alicia smiles politely. I'm a history researcher, sir. I'm not afraid of ghosts. The man just stared at her for a moment, then lowered his head. It's not about being afraid. It's about being counted. They count who comes in, and they don't always let who goes out. The words stuck in her mind as she arrived at the ruins in the early afternoon. The waist-high stone walls still stood, though some had collapsed over time. A weathered wooden gate lay on the ground. Inside the fort area, there were the remains of barracks foundations, and in the middle a metal flagpole bent to the side. Alicia set up her small tent on the inside of the wall. She began to note the details of the structure and take photos with her camera. The desert wind blew softly, carrying faint whispers that were probably just her own imagination. Night fell quickly, and Alicia ate a light dinner while reading her old journal. There was no sound other than the ticking of her watch and the rustling of the sand. She lit a lantern and lay down, but in the middle of the night, she woke up. There was a sound. Footsteps. Many. Orderly. Coordinated. Marching. The sound came from beyond the stone walls, like dozens of boots pounding on the sand in a military rhythm. Alicia crept out of the tent, her heart pounding. She turned off the lantern and peered through the half-collapsed wall. What she saw made her blood run cold. A line of soldiers, walking in formation, encircling the fort. Their uniforms were ancient, faded gray with flat Civil War-era caps. They carried bayonet-style rifles over their shoulders. But their heads, no. Their necks were neatly cut, and from the blackened scars, a thin mist drifted like incense smoke. They didn't speak. No sound. But their feet walked in perfect rhythm, circling and circling again. Alicia covered her mouth, holding her breath. She felt the cold seep into her bones, like the desert suddenly losing its temperature. The sand around her vibrated lightly with each step that hit the ground. The formation stopped. All at once, one of them, taller than the others, turned. Though headless, the body seemed to sense her presence. She began to walk toward the wall. Heavy footsteps grew closer. Alicia froze, pressed against the stone wall, her breath catching. Suddenly, there was a whisper in a foreign language, then a soft puff, like the wind from an invisible mouth. The lantern in her tent lit itself, even though it had been turned off. The yellow light caught the attention of the entire army. Now all the headless figures stood facing the fort, facing her tent, silent. Then they moved, walking in, silently, without haste. Alicia ran backward, hiding behind the ruins of the higher wall. She shivered, clutching a small stone in a ridiculous defense. She knew it would be useless, but the soldiers did not look for her. They simply stood around the tent, as if waiting for someone to come out. Several minutes, or maybe hours, passed before they finally dispersed. One by one, they returned to the darkness of the desert, disappeared as if swallowed by the night. Alicia held on until dawn. As soon as the sun touched the top of the dune, he quickly dismantled his tent, leaving the fort at a speed he never thought possible. He never returned, never finished his research, never mentioned the details of the incident in his journal. But in his final presentation to the college, he said one thing: some ruins don't need to be excavated. They're alive, just waiting for someone stupid enough to spend the night. 4. Radio station 66.6 FM. The night sky stretched darkly over the Utah highway, blanketing the barren red earth and towering boulders like ancient monoliths. Earl Thompson, a 62-year-old truck driver, had already logged more than 300 miles that day. He was driving alone, delivering empty containers back to Nevada, a cigarette burning in his fingertips, and an old radio on his dashboard humming static. To fight off sleep, he turned the knob to the AM station. Most of the channels were just noise except for one, an odd frequency that shouldn't exist. 66.6 FM, The Lost. Earl laughed softly. Now that's a scary channel, he muttered. But his drowsiness was gone. The voice on the radio was soft, calm. like a 1940s announcer, speaking softly in the middle of the night. Tonight, we present to you a list of those who have passed away, but have yet to realize their death. Then, one by one, the names were called, first and last names. Some sounded ancient, some were very ordinary. All were delivered slowly, as if each name had its own weight. Earl began to feel uneasy. Daniel R. McKinley, Ruth Halvorson, Earl Thompson, 718 Graywood Street, Las Vegas. Vehicle, 1989 Peterbilt truck. Earl's heart stopped for a moment. It was his own name and address. Even the make of the truck was spelled out correctly. He glanced at the radio. The broadcast remained flat. No commercials, no songs. Just that voice. Calm. Not threatening, but so wrong. Earl, don't be afraid. You're just lost. We'll guide you home. He snapped the radio shut. The voice was gone, but his chest was heaving. 3 miles down the road, he noticed the road signs had changed. Not just the shape, but the name. The road that had been marked Route 191 now read Whispers Road. The streetlights were beginning to dim, even though there was no fog or weather. The sky was still night, but the sun that usually appeared on the eastern horizon was nowhere to be seen. And strangely enough, the dashboard clock still read 3:06 a.m., even after he had been driving for almost an hour. Panic began to creep in. He stopped at a small rest area. No other cars. No sound. Even the crickets had disappeared. He tried to turn on the radio again. It was dead. The cord was still attached, but there was no sound. Then, from the truck speakers that should have been dead, the voice came back. No frequency. No indicator lights. Don't be afraid, Earl. Your time has long come. The real world has left you. You are still driving because you are not ready. Earl shouted and pounded on the dashboard. He started the engine and stepped on the gas. The road ahead began to look unfamiliar, like the world he knew was beginning to unravel. The trees stood too still. The shadows did not match the direction of the lights. In the rearview mirror, he saw the road slowly disappearing, like it was being consumed by black fog. Stop fighting, Earl. You've been dead for a long time. Earl now realized he never made it home last week. His truck had rolled over on a tight curve because of exhaustion. He didn't remember, or didn't want to remember, but his body, probably long since buried at the bottom of a ravine. That radio, that strange frequency, wasn't of this world. It was from another place, a place for souls who still think they're alive. And now, every night, drivers driving alone in the Utah desert swear they hear a voice on their old radios. An old man's voice warning them, don't turn on 66.6 FM, or you'll be driving forever. 5. The driverless train. In the dry, silent Arizona desert, an old railroad line cuts through red dirt and barren rocks. Rusty, nearly swallowed by sand, and unused since 1948, when a mysterious disaster put an end to Night Train 319 for good. Locals call the line the Charcoal Line because of its dark history that has never been recorded in official books. According to local lore, that night, June 12, 1948, Train 319 disappeared with all its passengers on its way to Flagstaff. There were no bodies, no witnesses, only the sound of a final whistle that broke the night before all was lost. But the story doesn't end there. Even though the line is dead, every new moon, when the sky is completely dark and the stars are covered by desert clouds, some residents of the small village near the tracks claim to hear something. A long, distant whistle, like the sound of metal screaming through time. The tracks, no longer connected to anything, are vibrating. Many avoid the area, but some, the curious or the brave, have waited by the tracks. One of them is Luis Marquez, a former railroad worker who now lives in seclusion. He swears that on a summer night 5 years ago he saw it. The train came without the sound of an engine, just the shudder and the cold breath of the night. It was pitch black like it had been burned out. The windows were full of faces. The train moved slowly, as if gliding between worlds. There was no driver in the front cabin. There was no sound of metal wheels, but the sand around the tracks was flying. In each window stood pale figures, human faces, but too white, too flat. Some screamed silently. Some wept, pressing bloody hands to the glass. Some just stared blankly, as if watching anyone who dared look back. Luis didn't move. He froze until the train disappeared into the distance, penetrating the night like endless smoke. Even more frightening, some people tried to get on. Young people or newcomers who thought it was just a local legend, waited and jumped on the train as it passed. They were never seen again, never returned. No trace of them was ever found, as if the train was headed to a place beyond human comprehension. An old priest who once lived in the area said the train was more than just a wandering spirit. The train is not a ghost. It is a vehicle for those who have never accepted death. They pile up, waiting, and every time someone gets on, they stop crying for a while. Today, locals have put up signs around the tracks, no entry after sunset. But the night still brings curiosity, and the whistle still sounds, calling from afar. And it is said that if you stand too close, you will hear voices over the creaking metal. Come on, we have a place for you.